Well, when state lawmakers return to session, they will be charged to address Oklahoma water law and decide where we go from here. And the two gentlemen joining me in studio are leading a joint committee on water that will likely frame an issue that will have long-reaching consequences. Joining me now are Senator Brian Crain and Oklahoma Representative Phil Richardson. Well, Senator Crain, let's start off with you. And if you would, just tell us what are the basic issues in layman's terms that we're talking about.
Oklahoma is blessed with an abundance of water. Unfortunately, it is not located throughout the state. We've got excess and surplus amounts of water in eastern and particularly southeastern Oklahoma. And we've got some needs and challenges for water in western Oklahoma and in the Oklahoma City area. What we're looking to do is to figure out just what exactly is the best approach, the best policy for the state, not only today but for the next 50 years, on how do we distribute our water and make sure that everyone in Oklahoma benefits.
Now, this is an issue we've been talking about for quite some time, but just this past summer in August, they started the Joint Committee on Water, and both of you headed up. Representative Richardson, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing.
Well, the object of this joint study that's being done is to take the science and facts that have been developed by the Water Resources Board and implement them into a plan that can be used to direct Oklahoma for the next 50 years and how it develops its water resources. It will be a living instrument that we will change as time goes on, but it'll be just a guideline that we need to follow that as we try to address our water needs for the next 50 years.
Yeah, and there's several different aspects that you've been talking about, correct?
Right. Of course, probably one of the basic aspects we have to look into is there's the claim to the water. We have tribal claims and the claims for the state of Oklahoma that at some point in time will have to be addressed, or we don't. Hopefully, we are able to reach a compromise, some way to allow this process to go forward without being entangled in some sort of a legal situation for several years, and that's one of the first things we have to address. And just basically, how do we go from here forward?
So, Senator Crain, what do you see as our choices?
Fundamentally, I think we've got three choices that the state of Oklahoma, and particularly the legislature, need to choose from. Each of them have their own benefits, but they also have their own difficulties with them. The first is that we can just do nothing. We can say that for the last 100+ years, this is the way that Oklahoma has treated its excess surplus water and just continue with it like that. The second choice is that we can say we need to do something. We need to shift our water, we need to transfer our water, but all of our water needs to stay within the state of Oklahoma. The third choice is that we say we are going to sell our water to other states. We're going to take that money that we make from it and we are going to build reservoirs, we're going to build infrastructure, we're going to build the other requirements that Oklahoma will need in the next 50 years, excuse me. Those three choices sound simple, but they are very difficult, very challenging, because there are people who are passionate one way or the other on each of the three choices.
I wanted to zero in on that last choice of actually selling the water that flows through Oklahoma. What keeps us from doing that right now?
There are several issues that do it. One, years ago, the Hugo community wanted to start selling their water that they had leased to the state of Texas. The state of Oklahoma said, no, we are not going to allow any waters. We're going to put a moratorium on those water sales while the Oklahoma Water Resources Board develops their plan. That plan has now been completed. We are going to receive it sometime next month, and then it will become the legislature's responsibility to review that, make determinations on where we need to go. That's where we are currently. What we're looking at in the future is there are people right now in the state of Oklahoma that do not have enough water. When you talk about the need for irrigation, when you talk about the need for drinking, when you talk about the need for wastewater, that can be quantified. But water has an additional meaning to us, and that's where we go boating, that's where we go skiing, that's where we go fishing. There is a value in having a beautiful lake like Lake Eufaula or Grand Lake that requires that there be water. Now, that water isn't being used for any economic purpose, but it is serving a benefit to the people. How do you determine how much is enough? How do you work to determine what's best for Oklahoma? And that needs to be taken into consideration.
And Representative Richardson, as Senator Crain mentioned, irrigation. You know, in talking with some friends in the agricultural community, they're always very nervous when we talk about water rights and water resources, because many of them fear what's happened out in the western part of the United States, where some agricultural interests literally were kind of left high and dry when it came to water rights.
Well, concerning water rights, especially most of our irrigation in Oklahoma is done with groundwater, which is kind of the opposite of what happens in the western states, where it's done with surface water. Groundwater is still treated as a private right. Perhaps I think it will continue to be that way from now on, and but when we think about irrigation and the use of the groundwater, that 30% of the currently appropriated water is used for irrigation, by far the biggest user in the state. It is projected that it will be up to 36% in 50 years. So that projection that agriculture irrigation will continue to increase in percent of water used. I think is one of those things that will continue to be. We're probably going to have to maybe do a better job of monitoring some of our groundwater. That's been one of the things that has not been done, because we would like in 50 years for that water to still be available for some use in irrigation purposes in agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Senator Crain, talk to me a little bit more about some of the obstacles that you see out on the roadmap, and in particular the Red River Compact. Explain to us what that is and why that is an issue that could mean something to the debate going on right now.
The Red River Compact is an agreement between the states of Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas regarding not only the water that flows into the Red River, but the water for the tributaries that go back to the headwaters. So it's rather extensive. It's a compact which has been approved by the federal government and Congress, and so it has not only the force of state law, but it also has the force of federal law. There are different understandings of what the Red River Compact does. There are some who will say that the Red River Compact prohibits Oklahoma from selling any water because it will increase the salinity of the Red River, and therefore Arkansas and Louisiana may well sue us. There are others that say no, there is a minimum requirement on the water that Oklahoma must keep within its borders, but anything beyond that will allow us to sell. This is another one of the issues that needs to be addressed when we look at that third possibility of selling water to Texas or some other state, is what does the current state and federal law allow for? And do we need to look at, can we operate within that if that's what we chose to do? Does it prohibit us from doing other activities?
And without getting too complex, we're not really talking about the quantity of water, but we're talking about the composition of that water and the salinity of that water?
Right. The Red River is a rather salty river. And when fresh water enters into it from Oklahoma, it causes it to be less salty. If we start redirecting that water from flowing into the Red River and offer it somewhere else, either in Oklahoma or into our neighboring state of Texas, because there's no fresh water coming in, it will be a much more salty river as it reaches Arkansas and Louisiana than it has been in the past.
Okay. I want to hear both of your thoughts on tribal rights. There's a lot of discussion that no matter what is done by the state, it could be superseded by some treaties that go all the way back to the 1800s.
Well, and that can be debated. You know how court deals can go on, and it's time for the tribes and the Oklahoma legislature and the people to sit down and come to some agreement that we can move forward on water, because hopefully we're wanting to make this to benefit all Oklahoma citizens for the next 50 years, and the tribal members are as much Oklahoma citizens as anyone else, and it is in their best interest to work some kind of agreement, and I think we can.
I am a firm believer that the various tribes in the state of Oklahoma have a real interest in not only their members, but also the non-member citizens that live within the boundaries of their particular nations. I also am firmly committed to the idea that everyone in the state legislature, as well as our governor, are interested in protecting those same people who we call Oklahoma citizens. we've got a great opportunity with water to change the dynamics of Oklahoma's economy and what our future looks like in the 21st century. What our committee is doing is that we are taking a look to say, okay, this is what we have, this is what we think the challenges will be in the future. How do we want to proceed in order to reach the goals that maximize the benefit for the state of Oklahoma?